Hey everybody, this is Emmy Thomas. I'm here talking with Don. Don, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody, which is what is it like to be you?
Yeah, well, at the moment, it's really exciting to be me because last year I made some like breakthroughs and became a lot more chill, less fearful, much more relaxed and confident. And yeah, I'm still enjoying that, like especially the contrast to how I remember I experiencing things beforehand. Um,
That's great. That's
yeah,
awesome.
so that's exciting.
Yeah, it reminds me, started going through perimenopause last January, so like a little over a year ago, and I finally feel a little bit like I'm coming out of it. Like I've managed to kind of
Mhm.
like balance the hormones, and yeah, because I had like brain fog, I had like night sweats, like what do we call them? Heat flashes or something and
Mhm.
just kind of like low energy, like a little bit of depression, a little bit higher anxiety, especially in the night. I wake up and be kind of like, why am I awake? Which was really
Mhm.
weird to kind of like deal with all that sort of stuff and realize how much hormones affect everything, really is the thing that I hadn't realized before. And that now in the past like 5 weeks, I've started to feel a little bit better. And so it's really nice the contrast, especially thinking even back to like last,
Mhm.
this past January, how different it is. So I understand you on this.
Yeah. Did you feel like completely new emotions, or were they just more intense?
I think that the anxiety was kind of newer. I think especially like the nighttime
Mm,
anxiety, like a night terror or something. I don't remember having like anxiety
mm,
during the night. And I think I would say too, like I've always had dreams that are kind of taking care of business. Like my girlfriend always has dreams where she's dating someone new and maybe she's having a baby. And my dreams are always like trying to find the pencil. That's what mine are, like, oh, my music's missing. I need to find my music or whatever. Like they're always problem solving dreams. And
mm.
but they've normally pleasant, kind of not unpleasant or something. Problem like a good problem solve like you're I don't know, at a place that you really like, but you have to find some place to have lunch or something. And then like during the past year or so, they've gotten like a little bit more anxiety. Like we really need this pencil or
Hmm.
somebody's gonna die. Like weird,
Yeah.
irrational.
Do you feel like emotions that are unusual for waking life when you're dreaming?
Um, Maybe the anxiety of it, like I do. But I would say too, like I experienced more anxiety even in my waking life too. So I would say it's kind of similar. So anxiety in my waking life, which used to be pretty low, had like ramped up a little bit, and it ramped up like quite a bit in my sleep. So the extremity in the sleep, I guess, was a little bit more, and I guess too, like the acuteness like in
Mm,
the moment how powerful it was. Like if I woke up, and suddenly was like I shouldn't be awake, having like a kind of almost an existential angst associated with it, whereas I don't really have like the existential angst kind of in my waking life. I do have like kind of a general melancholy or like kind of like lack of engagement or even sometimes like a low level dread of life. Not dread where I'm trying to avoid it, but more like I just don't feel kind of engaged and enriched uh,
mm,
by it. And that got worse too.
mm.
But it was like during the nighttime. Um, yeah, it was an acute sense, like a very kind of sharp sense of existential
Yeah.
angst, which is kind of the first time that I've had stuff like that. These are good
Yeah, like
questions.
for me, sort of one metaphor that oh, thank you. One metaphor that usually that I find quite fitting for my case is that I can sort of feel emotions with different distances. That usually I sort of feel my emotions like 1 or 2 meters away, or I don't know,
Mm,
like a yard or so. With I don't know how much that is, and And yeah, so I can sort of see them clearly, can distinguish them clearly. There's like no like nearsightedness interfering, but they are also not so immediate that I need to like feel compelled, completely compelled by them. And recently I was sick and had like this phase of an hour or so when emotions were extremely immediate for me. Like they felt as if they were directly here where I am. And another friend of mine has this. No, wait. Yeah, another friend of mine, I think, has. But I think in the Clearer Thinking interview, you also said something about like emotions seeming like they're really far away in a way.
Mm.
I think that I remember something of the sort, and that also sounded very similar. Sort of like these emotions were like super far away. Mine are sort of like relatively close. And when I was sick, they were very immediate. And I would imagine that for lots of people who have, for example, borderline, that lots of emotions experience in like psychic equivalence mode, as it's called, like this mode where like emotions are like super immediate, that they're like even closer.
That's
Does
really
that make sense?
interesting. Yeah, I have thought of my emotions and maybe I said kind of far away. I usually think of them as being like out of context, like kind of like a
Mm.
sneeze that comes out of nowhere or something, and it's one and done, or like a hiccup where it's just one hiccup, and that's how it largely feels. Like I don't feel them usually as like this present kind of thing that I'm like now my mood state has changed or whatever. Like I've kind of become a slightly different person because I'm a
Mm.
different emotion. That's kind of traditionally. I've gotten more in touch with my emotions recently, but now it's really interesting that you say this. I like this way of thinking about it, that the emotions sometimes can be 2 meters away, or sometimes 10 meters away, or sometimes 1 meter, or sometimes they're just like right there. That's a really interesting way to think of it. I'll have to think when and how do my emotions feel further away or closer to me, especially maybe if I am sick or not feeling well. That's really interesting to think about.
Mm. Yeah, this is actually a good segue to my first question. Uh, because I was sort of like, you just said like the core of psychopathy is probably having like a really small sense of self. And I've recently heard a little bit about, listened to like some videos by like CTAD clinic about dissociative identity disorder and in particular other specified dissociative disorder. And so it was sort of wondering, like other specified associative disorder, the way he described it, also seemed as if like certain alters have certain roles that they tend to front, and that hence these alters are there to do like daily business and interact with the world, but like the other ones are still sort of there. And I suppose the sort of patients that he usually sees at this clinic are ones that are somewhat in touch with these other alters that are like more in the background and sort of can get in touch with them. And so I was thinking whether perhaps like psychopathy is probably usually thought of as a personality disorder,
Mm.
but whether it could also be seen through the lens, or maybe like there's probably a distinction between acquired psychopathy and like genetic psychopathy. I don't know. It's also like basically a question for you, but like a separate one, I suppose. Um, whether there might be like some benefit to thinking of psychopathy as a dissociative disorder and maybe applying some of the techniques that work for other specified dissociative disorder for people who want to get in touch with the more like sequestered parts of their personality.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but I know like almost nothing about dissociation and dissociative identity disorder. Is that what it is? DID?
Yeah, true. They're like he describes DID as sort of the major DID and
Uh-huh.
describes other specified associative disorder as sort of DID minor or something. But
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know. So they seem to be very closely related though.
So yeah, I don't know that much about it. So maybe if you could tell me like a little bit more about it just right now, then I would be able to think, oh yeah, maybe that could work, including like some
Uh,
of the treatments.
Yeah, like I suppose I'm just parroting a few videos from this CTAD
Sure.
clinic YouTube
Mm,
channel. So maybe just like linking to some more insightful videos is probably going to be better for the viewers. But
uh,
sort of for us now, rough summary of some videos that I've heard could be He described one patient who, yeah, was sort of. There's usually a bit of an interference going on where the alter that fronts all the time is like experiences something that is like strongly emotional but can react to it, has like lots of context, has lots of world experience, knows what context everything stands. So like has a strong emotion but can react to it in some fashion and knows that it's like not dangerous. But the other alters behind that, they're like less conscious, they mostly just get the strong emotion and then they panic.
Mm.
And that is something that is sort of problematic for these patients. And so, one thing that he suggests is to like very consciously and with intense emotion self-soothe after this event happens, so that these self-soothing emotions sort of can trickle down to the less conscious alters that are like more dormant in the background. And like this is one of these things that I remember from the videos. And another one is that when people want to get in touch with the alters that are a bit like more dormant, they often need to first make them feel safe. Oftentimes the alter that fronts like was sort of selected for that job for certain uh, personality characteristics, like being particularly able to cope with the world with like lots of trauma and whatnot. And the other ones are like in the background because they don't feel safe in that world. And so it's sort of the job of the alter that fronts to create an environment that is welcoming for the other ones and also like be intentionally welcoming to the other ones over a long period of time so that they feel safe enough to become more conscious in a way. And like something that I'm very confused about is like how they end up communicating in that case, because like with other specified dissociative disorder, there's no like switching going on where like the therapist could then interact with them severally. But yeah, I don't know how they communicate. But that would be like something interesting to learn about. And like, of course, this example is interesting because if this model applies and psychopathy could be seen through the lens of a dissociative disorder, then it could be that there is like this alter that's like particularly stoic, that's fronting, and like other ones that would not be able to handle the world, that are like permanently dormant. And so then, if someone's willing, they could like go through some treatment to make the other ones feel safe and maybe get in touch with them in some fashion.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I will tell you that I have like thoughts about the, the emotions affecting other things and kind of agency. I also have thoughts about this idea of like being welcoming to like others, or other aspects of yourself. And then, so there are three things you've mentioned that will, if you can help me try to remember. The last one is kind of this idea of psychopathy being seen as a dissociative disorder. So, first, with regard to emotions, and this is something that I mentioned in kind of a recent video with Bob. Did you watch that one? Bob,
Yeah, I did.
yeah, so Bob says, I'll just kind of like quickly summarize. Bob says, there's a contradiction because in the book, I say after my dad
Mm,
tears through the bathroom door that I didn't feel fear in the moment. And then later, I take like a sledgehammer and a pickaxe to the door after it finally gets replaced, like 6 months
mm,
later or something in the house, and with my brother Jim. And he says, obviously, though, if you felt some emotional catharsis from like the destroying the door, then that suggests that you did experience like fear or a negative emotion during the event. And I think that's true.
mm,
And I think it's kind of, I think I tried to a little bit with another story that people probably don't think this one's crazy, but this one seems crazy to me. The one where I went to a music workshop that was like in a different state, and I had like no money to stay anywhere. And I was just like, I'll just figure it
mm,
out. And I did figure it out, but it was something that would freak me out now. And I think that there's something about psychopaths being in like this particular phase that I call the playground stage,
mm,
where it's like there are the problems, but they don't seem, it's like they're a kilometer away, to use your
mm,
expression. Like they're there, and you maybe are even like kind of aware that they're there, but they are so not present. You know, they're so distant, they're so muted that you couldn't kind of like they're basically not there, kind of in a way. And
Mm.
this is something too. My girlfriend is she's younger than I am. She still kind of is struggling from some of the choices that she made because it in a way it's bad to not be in touch with these emotions of fear. Like fear's there to help you usually.
Mm.
Even though you said earlier you know, like fear can also be too high, right? And then now you're experiencing like a lesser degree of fear that feels better, right? But probably like the psychopaths are feeling too little. And uh, the thing is that she's processing through some of the emotions or kind of the emotional impacts or the physical or kind of just
Mm.
like professional or educational, et cetera, ramifications of things that she was, you know, that happened to her in childhood or that happened that she chose, you know, as a young adult or whatever. So it's not to say that
Mm.
these things don't happen. And so I think that's a really interesting thing with the alters. You know, the front alter, you said, who is able to kind of act, is able to kind of maybe contextualize or something the emotion or
Mm.
the thing
Yeah.
that has happened. And then the other ones know, and then they just have a freak out. And that makes me think about like this idea of like agency and kind of I use this a little bit like Mormons, you know, like religious Mormons or whatever, they're like obsessed with agency. So I grew up
Hmm.
hearing agency all the time. And there's like a Mormon scripture that says that humans were made to act, not just to be acted upon. So not like it's act every time, you know, but not just to be acted upon, but also to act. And like this idea of like part of a core attribute of humanity being this ability to act. And I wonder what you think, Don, about like, is it the fronting alter's ability to act that helps that alter handle the emotion better than the ones that don't act?
Mm. There are like several aspects to this. So I think like when you said they are able to contextualize the emotion, then I was like completely on board with that. That makes a lot of sense. Um, I think being able to act on it is like that also makes sense, but I think it comes down to sort of having bit of control over the situation. Like I have sort of a thing where like it's very difficult for me to like when something happens to me and I have no control over like preventing it from happening to me again. And like this is a very bad feeling. And so I would suppose that being able to act gives you like a sense of control, and that is probably soothing. Um, and yeah, but then something that I find confusing is that like this probably is huge interpersonal variation. Um, that lots of people with well with a bunch of different personality disorders actually sort of feel as if things just happen to them, like that the environment just sort of I don't know forces them, or like not so much forces them, but like they're sort of acting automatically, reflexively in response to the environment in some fashion, and that sort of seems in contrast to the like agency that this fronting alter has, and I don't know, I'm just confused about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I too, you know, like let's say my girlfriend, she had to get something out of my car and she didn't put the key back where it goes, right? So now the key's lost. It's been lost for a few days. And that could bother me. But I think because I think I'll just order a new key. And in fact, I'm going to the car dealer today. And I think I'm just going to talk to them today. Like that makes me feel less weird about the fact that there's like this thing, you know, like, oh no, you know, there's this key missing or something. So I think that is right. It's not even just the illusion of control, but if you have the ability to act and kind of fix it pretty easily, then I think it's really easy to kind of tamp down the feeling, I guess, or not let the
Mm.
feeling get crazy. And I think that often happens with children, is children don't have a very good sense of what can be really easily fixed and what can't, right? So the ice
Mhm.
cream cone falls on the ground and they're like, ah, my world's over, you know. Whereas an adult thinks we can just buy another ice cream, you know. But I think the kid, for whatever reason, and it reminds me of one time my friend's niece, she was like 6 at the time, was going to go to the zoo for the first time. And her aunt, my friend, asked her, "What are you excited to see at the zoo?" And she said, "Dragons and pigs." And neither dragons nor pigs are at the zoo. But it's just like they don't have a very good concept of like what is possible and what's not. What you can kind of expect to have be easily fixed and what not. So I wonder if
Mhm.
that's part of it is because when I
Mm.
feel like, oh, this has an easy fix. And in fact, one time I think actually like a roommate of mine said that in her family, her dad used to always say, if something can be solved by money, then it's not really a problem. And people are like, well, not everyone has money, you know, stuff like that. But I do think that's like kind of a good perspective about a lot of things. Like if something is can be solved as easily as with money, then can that be kind of a problem? And I guess that kind of like conflates in a way, the way I'm even thinking about it, conflates the idea of problem versus the emotional reaction. And maybe the emotional reaction of some of these inner alters or whatever are not even associated with the problem itself, but are based on something different. And so maybe I'm assuming too much. Maybe I'm assuming that they're, because, you know, there's a phrase in English when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I'm naturally a problem solver, you know, type person, problem solving mind. So I'm assuming that these inner alters are also trying to solve problems and are upset by the problems, but maybe they're not upset by that at
Mm.
all. So I don't know. I kind of don't have really maybe even that much to add other than the things I've said about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering like how old these alters really are in terms of like maturity or something. Like, um, at what age were like certain turning points for you? I think you mentioned like 4 years old was some turning point, and I don't know what
Yeah,
other ages.
I don't really remember. I have a memory of my sister, who's 5 years younger than me when she was born, you know, but other than that, it's like really hazy. I would
Yeah.
guess, you know, like here and there, like, you know, going to school was probably, you know, a turning point, but I don't really have good memories my own self of, and my memories have gotten worse too in the past
Mhm.
10 years. Like I used to have more childhood memories than I have now, unfortunately.
Yeah, at least you have a book. You have a
Yeah,
book where you can look it up again. I'm also
exactly.
writing like blog posts now to protocol these things before I forget them. Yeah, I
Exactly.
was wondering because so I asked a few people about this, and one person I know developed yeah, quasi nearly psychopathy around age like what was it 11 to 13-ish or so,
Mm,
and another friend of mine had like a 5-year psychopathy phase, as it were, from age 16 to probably 21-ish. And yeah, so she just sort of like, with a bit of help from someone else, sort of got out of that again, and then also preferred to not have it. But like the ability to just sort of go into that, she says like she brings the shields up or something. It's like the
yeah.
metaphor that apparently uh, occurred to her. And like the ability to do that more or less at will seems like something, I don't know, somewhat unusual. And maybe that's associated with her developing this at like such a relatively high age, high age, 16. Um, and maybe people who develop these things at like age 11 are sort of in between. And if someone has to do this at an extremely young age, like 4 or even earlier, then it's like probably much harder to communicate with the alters, for the alters to understand the world, for the alters to like feel safe enough in whatever the environment is, because they are basically also still so young. I would imagine that if someone is like not in touch with the world, like so far away from the world and experiences, they can't really learn very much and they can't mature very well. And yeah, maybe that makes it easier for people who develop these things at a higher age to reverse them again. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That is interesting. I don't remember a time before, really. I do remember there was like a fork in the road. I still kind of remember it where I intentionally, somewhere between the probably the ages of 5 to 8, where I intentionally decided to like force more of my decision making into my conscious mind, which was basically just like I'm going to, and I think you can train this type of stuff because like maybe people have noticed this about my hands that they look weird. It's almost like all the fingers operate differently. They're like independent, like in a way that I think other people's fingers often aren't. But I think it's probably like piano lessons or something. Like I
Yeah.
learned I learned to treat them independently because I just trained myself to do it. So similarly, like I think I just thought, I can just be more consciously aware of what's happening in the moment and what's happening in the future. And so I have that. But I don't remember a time before. But there is it's like one of the very first interviews that I did with an Australian. It's like 20 something Australian. I forget what his pseudonym is. I actually did meet him in Australia, and then we had the video later during the pandemic. But he has a similar thing where he was like, I think 12, and his parents got divorced. And that was kind of like the split for him, where he, feels like the before 12 he doesn't like really identify with psychopathy, and then after 12 he did identify with psychopathy, like whatever is the way to kind of put it. So I think that's interesting to think about people who have like later in life. It's interesting too what you said, Don, about, and this gets me back to kind of the second point that you had initially brought up that I have feelings about, which is to create this like hospitable, gentle place for parts of yourself to kind of come out and express themselves. And this is something that I have been doing a little bit in my guided meditation, which is just on the Calm app. And it's Jeff Warren. I have like no affiliation or like sponsorship of it, but just like I really enjoy this guy, Jeff Warren. And he talks about like sending yourself loving kindness, and allowing for like all this
Mhm.
space. And it's interesting because I don't normally think of myself at all in terms of like the construct that you're kind of describing, like with like a fronting altar and internal whatever.
Mhm.
If anything, like I had like zero altars and there was just that's how it kind
Yeah.
of felt internally. Like there was like there was not even one
Mhm.
person in there that
Yeah.
was Jamie. It was just zero Jamies. Yeah. So, but he talks about that, and he's like, put your hand on your heart and like say, I got you, little buddy," or whatever. And that sort of
Mhm.
stuff really does help. And so I do
Mhm.
think that this idea, like, of kind of whatever it is, like, um, of allowing for different aspects of yourself, whether they're alters or whether they are just parts of yourself that you kind of stuff down, and they don't feel, those parts don't feel. And I think it's totally fine to personify them, and it makes a lot of sense. And maybe for some people who are listening, like they actually have they're already personified. They have names or separate names or whatever. But this idea of allowing for a gentler place for those things to come up, I think is like a very nourishing practice. Like it feels
Mhm.
good, it doesn't feel bad, it feels great. And it feels like in some ways that I'm like healing my inner child. That feels really nice too.
Yeah. Is that also a strategy? Like, I think you mentioned in another interview that your girlfriend has also gotten in touch more with her emotions.
Yes.
Is that like a similar process? And can you even talk about that? I don't know if it's too private.
Oh, well, honestly, with her, it's interesting because I don't know if it's because we're just different, or different things work with different people or something. She just recently, like I've been doing meditation, I guess, and trying to kind of do these things, like have like a gentler approach to my inner child, etc. For like 4 years or something. And she just recently, in the past couple months, do you know the TV show White Lotus? No,
No.
no. So they've been
Mm.
talking about Buddhism a lot in the season of this television show that just ended. And because of the what they've been talking about in Buddhism, about Buddhism, she's gotten very interested in Buddhism and it's been really helpful. She says she listens to her monks
Mhm.
every day. So kind of don't know what her practice is sometimes, like she just kind of goes through different things. I would say though that one thing we do have in common is this idea of the inner child and like trying to be
Mm.
gentle to the inner child.
Yeah, that's also something that I've recently practiced some more. Like, I think for me, there were a few turning points in my life where um, I think it was around age 8 or so when I started to sort of narrate my life.
Huh.
And then it was around puberty, age 13 probably, when I started to become extremely self-conscious. And we only have like elementary school and high school in Germany. And my elementary school was like very like violent. So I mostly just like I think I'm autistic, and I just didn't understand what was happening around me. Maybe some of them were play fighting, some were actually bullying people, and
Mm.
like there was a lot of like yeah, I was just really afraid of of all this violence, and that yeah sort of had an effect. Like I would try to mostly keep away from people, lock myself in like some bathroom stall or something so that I'm somewhere safe. And like this fear seemed to sort of stick around afterwards. Like my high school was much more peaceful, but because I became so self-conscious, I sort of continued to feel this fear all the time. But in this case, it was less fear of like any particular person or anyone around me, and it became more sort of a fear of some impending catastrophe, that something terrible might happen any moment. And this fear, like it projected on all sorts of like plausible sources of the fear, but it was just like this looming fear in the background. And yeah, this I think started around age 13, and then sort of yeah, I got separated from anything concrete in my environment. Um, and
What do you
yeah,
mean
more
by
recently,
that?
I've
You got separated from anything concrete in your environment.
like I think when I think back to elementary school, then yes, sort of my fears were a lot more intense than the fears of the people around me. But I could still like sort of point to like obvious things that could have happened to me. With my current consciousness, I'm like, yep, there were definitely people who were like beating up other people, and like I don't want to be beaten up, so it makes sense that I was afraid.
Yeah.
And when I now fast forward to high school, there was like no particular fear that I could have been like so afraid of. And this is why I sort of got detached from anything concrete and
Mm.
sort of became its own thing in a way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that is like was one of these observations. And then like more recently, starting 15 years ago, a bit less, 12 years ago, um, and yeah, more recently last year, I overcame a lot of that, and like there were like lots of little steps along the way, and now I'm trying to reconnect more as well to like my inner child. So basically, from elementary school, myself from elementary school age, sort of before the elementary school trauma like became its own thing, sort of the yeah. And like I feel very um like nurturing feelings toward this inner child, and I've also sort of personified my inner child to um yeah, I don't know, sort of there seems like some sort of inhibition that's like makes it easier when I like personify them as like a separate person. But yeah, so this is also something that I've recently had some success with.
That's interesting. I have like a couple thoughts. One of them, you kind of acquired like an inner, you said like a narrator when you were like a child. Yeah, I
Yeah, so
also, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I would just like explain it a bit more, but like maybe you can go first, and then I
Well,
can just
I
contradict
also have like
it.
had like an inner monologue that was going that was kind of like it was like a narrator, I guess. It was always just kind of like inner commentary. Actually, have you ever
Hmm.
seen the Muppets? The
No, I don't think
puppets?
so.
Yeah, there's like they call it the peanut gallery. There's like these two old guys who are always just making comments about whatever's happening to the
Mm.
rest of them, like up in the audience, and it's kind of interesting because even that like concept of they're not part of the show. They're up they're up as
Hmm.
allegedly part of the audience. They're pretending to be part of the audience, but then just kind of like that separation, but the commentary. And I wonder now, thinking about that, was that like an intentional thing? Like, was it like an intentional to kind of make like these two old guys, like in the Muppets, like a part of myself be like, it's not happening to us. We're just commenting on it. We're
Hmm.
just like applauding sometimes, or we're just whatever. Like we're separate, but they're still me because that was what the inner monologue was. Is that was the
Uh-huh.
this part of me that seemed separate, but was like love to give its opinion about whatever was going on.
Uh. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was sort of the maybe some sort of inverse of that. At least it seemed to me that way. It was like it was very complicated because I had this problem that I was sort of like a regular person, and nothing particular, but I thought that other people expected me to be extremely consistent, like act according to
Mm.
the same principles in every situation. Know exactly why I act the way I do at every moment, and be like perfectly honest and transparent, and also be like very like diffident, yeah, inferior feeling, and
What do you mean by
low
diffident?
status and whatnot.
Is
Like,
you mean low status or?
yeah, like very low self-confidence, low self-esteem. And yeah, so this was the character that I thought I had to play in order to like be accepted in society.
Hmm.
And so I tried to like consistently always play this character to like, have you heard of echoism?
No, I haven't.
It's the thing like Craig Malkin has written about this. He contrasts echoism against pathological narcissism. Basically, same principle, but like with echoism, you completely give up on yours, or you pretend, you create like a false self
Mm.
that pretends to completely give up on any personal preferences and everything. And usually, these people sort of enslave themselves to another person,
Hmm.
like to their like mother or father, for example, to like become like their their caregiver, sort of in reverse. Um, and yeah, and so this seemed kind of similar, except I didn't like enslave myself to any one person, but sort of to my completely weird expectations from my current viewpoint of what is sort of societally expected of me. And I haven't heard this from anyone else. But yeah, this is sort of how I would describe what I was thinking at the time. And because like transparency and honesty and so on were also like parts of this false self. But of course, I actually had preferences. Like one of them was, for example, that I'm not allowed to have any aesthetic preference. I've heard this aphorism somewhere that says like, "Don't judge a book by its cover," or probably some German version of it. And then was like, "Oh my God, I'm not allowed to have any aesthetic preferences anymore with regard to my own appearance." So like clothing, hairstyle, everything, I'm not allowed to have like any kind of preferences. And so I needed to find like some sort of pretext how I can look at least sort of approximately like the sort of person I feel like not super self-conscious about. And at the same time, create some sort of narrative for myself why I'm performing these actions.
Mm.
And so
Hmm.
I had to like create yeah, constantly like sort of think about it on one in one sense, sort of think about it relatively rationally to make my actual decisions in the real world, but then also create this narrative, this pretext for why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. And I used like this narration for this pretext and pretended that this is the only thing that I'm thinking, and tried to keep the actual like more rational thoughts completely non-verbal so that I can like quickly forget them again. And I
Mm.
actually managed to trick myself into thinking that I'm not having these non-verbal thoughts. that I'm only this narration. And yeah, then at some point in like 2012 or 13 or so, I finally like noticed I'm doing that and then stopped. So
Mm, that's
that was very
interesting.
liberating.
So I think I understand what you're saying. Can I give you an example and you tell me if this is accurate to what you were
Yeah.
saying? So let's say your favorite color is yellow. You want to wear a yellow shirt because that's your favorite color, but you feel like you
Mm.
can't have the aesthetic preference for how you look or whatever. And so you instead think, well, yellow is the color of like the local soccer team, football team or whatever. And so then you say, okay, that's the reason why I'm wearing the yellow shirt is for the football team. And then you forget about the fact that yellow's your favorite color. Is that kind of like the mechanism for how it would go?
Yeah, exactly. I would pretend to, yeah.
That's interesting.
Um,
And you were pretty successful, I guess, at pretending because you didn't notice you were doing this until you said 2012 or something.
yeah. I think like my environment changed. I felt a lot safer at the university. I had like friends and yeah, I suppose like that's also like another theory. Okay, this would go too far, but too far off topic.
No, keep
Um,
going. I don't
but
care.
like I had like some I had some like friends at the university and everything became like a lot nicer and I was like socially more integrated and everything. And I suppose it became less necessary at that point. And then I remember this time that when some professor asked a question and someone else in the audience answered the question, and I simultaneously thought, that it's such a pity that I didn't think of that, even though I had already thought of it. And
Ah.
like I realized that there was sort of an internal contradiction in that thought, and realized, oh, I had thought it non-verbally, but I had not like narrated it yet. And so because I pretended
Oh.
to myself that the non-verbal thoughts don't exist,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
That is really interesting. Sometimes I wonder that about myself too, because I still, not as much for some reason, but I still have internal narration going on.
Mm.
And I remember when I was in Brazil, I was really aware of it because I thought I shouldn't be having this in English. I should be narrating in Portuguese. And I think that's when I became very aware of like, oh, yeah, this is something that doing. But I also thought everybody does this. And I think that is wrong, not accurate. Does that
Yeah,
sound
how
right,
do
Don?
you?
That's not what everybody is doing?
I keep asking people about this. And like one friend of mine says that they think mostly visually. Another friend of mine says that they think in language, but in printed language. And another friend thinks that they like thinks mostly in terms of like spoken words. Like there seems to be like a huge variety. And like, how do you perceive your thoughts?
It's spoken. It's like the narration or whatever. And that's why I tried to like switch. I was like, I might as well be practicing my Portuguese in my thoughts too.
Mm,
And that's what it was. It was then, but it's like I'm talking to an audience, and that's what I mean about like this weird. Like I can see that there were choices that I made, even if I don't remember the choices that I probably chose at one point to speak to myself as if I was a separate entity, as if the speaker was somehow
hmm
separate from the listener.
hmm Yeah. Do you perceive your nonverbal thoughts, like just sort of these thought impulses?
I tried to during meditation. I tried to kind of be like just watch my thoughts, even kind of the non-verbal ones, and see because there's one meditation that you do or like is kind of I think common where it's like if you have a thought you say thinking, and if you have like or yeah, I think that's it. Have a
Mm,
thought, then it's like something. And then if you have like a vision, then you say like seeing. And if you have like a feeling, then you say feeling or whatever. Like as your kind of mind kind of goes, cycles through those things. And so I try to do that. That has helped, I think, to be able to be like, okay, sometimes I'm having bodily sensations and it's kind of like a thought because my mind's aware of it,
mm,
you know? Or
mm.
sometimes I have like a vision kind of pop up in my mind and it's an image. So that's its own type of thought. It's almost like probably the best way to describe it, Don, is I kind of thought before that like kind of like a little bit like you in this like no offense kind of weird way that like nobody told you to do it this way, but you you somehow decided to do it this way. where I just thought so, in my mind watching cartoons or something when they had the thought bubble or like a comic, like an old school comic where it had a thought bubble and it was words. I somehow in my mind thought that thoughts are always words.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think then I just started ignoring the rest because I was like, this is not a thought. This is not like a legitimate thing for my brain to be doing
Yeah,
if it's
exactly.
not
Like,
words.
I suppose I kind of intentionally, though unconsciously, did the same thing.
Yeah.
But then, like, in the past 12-ish years, I have not been doing that anymore, and now I perceive these thoughts like relatively obviously. I suppose the moment the thought is there, I cannot really perceive it yet, but then afterwards there is like some sort of echo, and I can sort of look at that echo, and then there's a bit of synesthesia going on, so I actually like see some sort of metaphor, I suppose, for the thought. Um, and there's like some sort of haptic quality to it as well. And yeah, so this is quite interesting, and like this is also really useful. When I'm now trying to reconstruct, like, of course, my trick was narrate with verbal language and then forget all the nonverbal thoughts really quickly. Um, but now I have like really complicated nonverbal thoughts that feel very natural.
Mm.
And now, when I'm trying to reconstruct, like, how did I actually think about the situation? I'm sort of testing out what comes natural. And when there's like a really complicated thought that feels really natural to me, then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's probably the one that I've been like thinking a million times in my childhood. And
Oh, that's
it's like,
interesting. That's interesting. Maybe I do kind of a similar thing because I think of it in a little bit different way, but I think I just think of it this way because again, it's just like a crutch that I've like learned and it's like the only way I
mm,
can kind of think. But there's like a resonance to like any object, like this object has a pitch.
mhm,
But every object has a pitch. And I learned this from, do you know, like the kettle drums? Pauken, I think is the German word for
mhm.
it. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
timpani. Like they're tuned to pitches, and if you sing the pitch that it's tuned to, then it has sympathetic vibrations. It
Yeah,
will
makes
keep
sense.
vibrating more and more and more and more till it sings back to you, because it's as if you've hit it, that it's ringing so much because you're singing into it. So I think of thoughts sometimes that way when I think about, I think
Mm,
kind of like what you said, your natural thought, the thought that seems, most natural or
mm,
whatever. I think the thought that's most resonant to me, the thought
mm.
that's like makes me vibrate a little bit inside, kind of almost feels like it's vibrating inside. It Then I think this must be a thought I've had since I was a child. This must be like a really truly Jamie thought.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is also the sensation that I share. And I suppose like if the thought is like unusually complex, then it's also something like
Oh,
when you're
interesting.
I don't actually play an instrument, but I would imagine that when you like practice it a lot, then you're probably at some point not so much thinking in terms of like moving a finger to a particular place. You're thinking in terms of like playing a chord or something.
Yeah.
And then like relatively complex things become sort of their individual thoughts. And for me, it was, for example, this thought of um, I like one example was like I want to someone invited me to join a theater course at my school, sort of an extracurricular thing.
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking that, well, on the one hand, I kind of wanted to do that, and I could not have like joined it voluntarily because that would have been like an expression of self-confidence to just like do something like that.
Yeah, and
So I always was
self-expression
dependent on
and
other
like
people
this
to
is me.
invite me in
Yeah.
some fashion. Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's always like dependent on people to invite me to stuff, and then someone was inviting me, so this was really awesome. But the problem was, I knew on this unconscious level that I was sort of play acting this echoist. False self thingy. And so I had this thought of I would, on the one hand, like to do that, but if I act really badly, then that's kind of embarrassing. I don't want to do that. But if I act too well, then people might realize that I might be fooling them the whole time already with my echoist false self. And so
Yeah.
I would have to act like a professional actor who has to play an amateur actor in a movie. And that seemed like too hard for me. I didn't think that I could do that. And like this is a relatively complex weighing of factors, but it happened like it seems extremely natural to me. And so I think I've just thought this through many times unconsciously. It's one of these, yeah, one of
So
these things
what
that
did you end
resonate.
up doing? Did you act like a professional actor pretending to be a bad actor?
No, I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm too shy," and didn't join the theater
Oh
course.
my gosh, this is so sad. This is the saddest story that you've told so far, Don.
Oh.
It reminds me though, I know this little kid, he's like 10 or something, and he loves to sing. You can tell he loves to sing. And he's exactly this way. He's like, well, like if you ask, I guess then I'll, just, do it because you asked. I'm doing you a favor or whatever. But you can tell he like loves to sing. And I really hope, that he'll get past that and just sing, find some way to sing or whatever. That's a sad thing. Do you know the poet Langston Hughes?
Yes, I have. Oh gosh,
He's
I read one sort
Harlem,
of short story. Hmm.
yeah, Harlem Renaissance poet, African American, like in the early 20th century. He has like a quote, or I'm gonna botch it a little bit. It goes like, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it
Uh,
shrivel up like a raisin in the sun?" And that's, I think about that all the time. What happens to a dream deferred,
mm.
like a dream that's put off? You could have done that acting and and lived your dream, but you didn't. Does it shrivel up like a raisin in the sun?
Yeah, no, I found it so interesting to read this in your book that I think it was something along the lines of that of musicians, it's expected that they are outrageous and iconoclastic, or I don't, that's not the word you used. Um, but and that hence that's like a way of like indulging in these interests. And for me, it would have been like the other way around,
Mm,
that like people could find out about my narcissistic I don't know interests in like the most general sense of narcissistic, not the personality disorder necessarily. And then hence I would have like avoided, like, I mean, I didn't play any instruments or anything, so this was never a question, but like I would have avoided things like that because people could have noticed, whereas like for you it was like exactly the inverse. And I
yeah.
found this like so liberating that you can think about like the same situation in two completely opposite ways.
But actually, I think it's more similar, as you kind of mentioned this, because for me, I think, and maybe I don't want to misconstrue you, but this is how I felt, is that I didn't want people to see me for who I am. I only wanted to see them to see the things that I let them see. I didn't want them to see like any of my secrets or whatever. Not like I had
Hmm.
secrets, but I just wanted to kind of control what people saw of
Yeah.
me. So in some ways, acting outrageously was just a way to like not have them see me. I was like, oh, I'll just play this outrageous
Mm.
role, which is part me, but also it's just the role. It's like, oh, I'm doing this. I remember thinking that a lot, is that I would give people kind of aspects of my identity, my so-called identity, to kind of just like put in their brain, so then they'd be like, oh, I understand who Jamie is. So I'd be like, yeah, I'm this like rock and roll whatever, and then I thought
Mm.
that's how they'll just think of me. They'll be like, Jamie, the musician, or Jamie the surfer, or Jamie the she's like, what, into these other things, or whatever it is. Because I didn't, I know that people are reductive. They take something that's complex and they
Mhm.
simplify it. So I was like, I'll just give them the word for it. I'll give them musician. That way they don't
Yeah,
dig
yeah.
deeper, being like, what's up with Jamie? Like, is Jamie some of these other things too? Is Jamie kind of mean? Is Jamie a little bit gay? Is Jamie, like not as smart as she thinks she is, or smarter than we think she is, or kind of like, I didn't want them to do the digging. I wanted them to
Mm.
just accept the superficial.
Yeah, exactly. I think like this trying to be so extremely consistent was also about like not prompting people to try to think that I might have like they might be confident about some things.
Interesting.
Like I was certainly like active in some communities outside school where I was like a bit more relaxed and I actually felt more comfortable there, like not to the extent that I feel comfortable now, but more comfortable definitely. And like I like wanted to like keep that sort of separate and like yeah be like very consistent for those in the school environment where I didn't feel safe um in order to yeah not prompt people to notice that there are more sides to me.
That's interesting. And even kind of I identify with this a little bit. The more I felt kind of out of my element doing something, the more I did have like a ready answer for anything somebody might ask. Like, oh,
Mm.
why did you choose to play the bass? And then have like a reason. Or what did you do this weekend? And make sure that every weekend I had something to say that was like whatever. So this idea of when you kind of said earlier that you would come up with a consistent reason for why you were doing something and have that be the reason. I did that too, to like a certain extent. I had a reason that I could give somebody at any moment
Yeah,
for what
exactly.
I was doing, but I didn't try to forget the real reason. Well,
Oh,
I
okay.
yeah, I think I had like a really weak real reason anyways. And that might have been another reason why I felt like I had to come up with, like, because normal people could be like, why are you wearing the yellow shirt? And they'd be like, that's my favorite color. But that was harder for
Mm.
me to do. You know, it
Yeah.
was like, why are you taking Spanish instead of French? And I did not have an answer. And so I thought everybody keeps asking questions. I should probably just always have an answer.
Yeah, I also remember like on my way to school and home to like constantly be like rehearsing all my answers to everything. And
Mm,
like they didn't make any sense. Like, for example, when walking, I noticed at one point that I was like moving my arms back and forth,
uh,
like there's sort of naturally doing that movement while I was walking. And I was like, oh shit, I don't know. Why I'm doing that. If someone like jumps out of the bushes now and quizzes me on that, then
yeah.
I'm screwed. And I need to either come up with some reason for this or I need to stop doing it. And like I could not think of any reason. And so for a while, tried to keep my arms completely straight while walking in order to like avoid getting asked about that. And uh, yeah, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's the same mechanism, I suppose.
Yeah, that's interesting. I too would have like dialogues with people, like imaginary dialogues in which, not just about this, but about all sorts of things about like, oh, like what would I do if somebody asks this or says this or, what if somebody invites me to a birthday party? How do I respond?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like I suppose birthday parties, yeah, like they're also a bit difficult. Uh yeah, but generally it's like this is probably also why I was so well prepared for this question about the theater course, because I probably like rehearsed it lots of times beforehand,
Uh,
for like lots of different contexts, anything that had to do with role play games and yeah, like there are lots of possibilities
but
like
you
that.
rehearsed the answer of no, like, no, I can't do the theater course. No, thank
No,
you.
I rehearsed like this whole thinking through that
Ah,
I have to,
I see.
in order to not reveal that I'm like playing this echoism thing, I would have to, yeah, like play the way that like a professional actor plays an amateur actor, and they
Hmm.
can't do that, and like this whole complicated logic seems so super intuitive to me today, and it's really quite complicated. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you know, I hesitate to mention this because it's so obscure. I don't even know. They're called like something in the rubber band or whatever. They were like popular in like 2009, 2010. They do that song, Our Home, oh, something home. Home is wherever I'm with you. Anyways, it's called, NPR, they have
Yeah.
tiny desk concerts. Have you ever
Uh-huh.
seen a tiny desk concert?
No, I don't think so.
So it's kind of gotten popular now, especially like they get some pretty good musicians to do the Tiny Desk concert. But these people, were some of the first to do the Tiny Desk concert, and it's called that because it's just them singing in the office of NPR. There's like no stage. They're just like
Hmm.
crammed into an office, like a space like this, as big as this. And these people, like the girl had like shaved head and then like this really long kind of like associated with like Jamaican kind of like a knit hat, like almost like
Hmm.
Rastafarian.
Yeah.
And the guy had like a suit on, no shirt, and all this like curly hair, super long curly hair all wrapped up. And all the comments were kind of like, "Oh, this smells like armpits." Like the armpit and patchouli, and other people on it was a social media post that was showing this video that was done like in 2009. Other people were like, I can't believe all the negative comments. This is what being authentic looks like. Do people not know what being authentic looks like? And you know what, Don? I liked the comments that were like, this smells like armpits and patchouli because I don't think that was authentic. And I don't know if I know what authentic looks like, but I think I kind of get what you're saying, that there is like almost an aesthetic for what authentic looks like. And I think that it's weird. Not, I don't mean to call you weird, but it's interesting to think that you're trying to achieve looking authentic. And in order to try to achieve that looking authentic, you're trying to come up with all these reasons. Like you're like thinking in overdrive, to try to just look like you didn't think at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I mean, if it's fun for them, if they like, I don't know, enjoy playing
Yeah,
those roles, so why
yeah,
not?
yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. But I also kind of was like, okay, but yeah, they do probably smell like hippies. And we all know that hippies smell. And there's
No, I
nothing
like.
wrong with being a hippie. Like I've played at being a hippie too. I've played at being all sorts of things. There's nothing wrong with playing those sorts of roles, but I think it's weird when people are like, no, that's who they authentically are. I'm like, that's who she authentically is a Rastafarian, you know? Like, it's fine to say that you kind of like the hat and you want to wear the hat or something. It's weird too because she takes the hat off within the first 10 seconds or so of this video. And I'm like, probably because she feels weird wearing that hat. She kind of knows the hat was a little too much. And like even the
Yeah,
way
it's
she kind of moves, I'm like, um, I don't know. It's possible that that's truly 100% just her authentic self. It's just weird to me to see you're kind of like, how could that be authentically you when that's just like an aspect of somebody else's culture? It's almost like you've kind of culturally appropriated this particular thing wholesale. Like you haven't adapted it really in any kind of way. I don't know. These are like really interesting questions about what it means to be authentic.
mm. I think this also ties in a bit with something that you said, I think probably also in the Clearer Thinking interview, that people are like overly concerned about being manipulated in some fashion, even if it comes at no cost to themselves. And I
Interesting.
see this a lot in comments, like the comments that you just cited, for example, where they sort of try to, where they like super hyper
Oh,
attuned to like someone not being completely authentic or something. But also in like some videos, like when you give an interview somewhere, there are like lots of comments underneath where they make up all sorts of reasons why you, I don't know, might be manipulating this and that person in this and that direction. And like, why care?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because there's no comment that's like, I like this song. There's no comment about the music. It's almost only about like whether or not they're being authentic or not. And some people saying yes and some people no. And it's interesting because it's like the people who are saying no, are they like, I'm not buying this. I'm not buying this. They're not real hippies. And are the people that are saying yes being like, uh, you guys are just afraid of being manipulated into thinking that and some people did comment that like, have you just forgotten what authenticity is? Like you just think everything's fake and you just worry about being faked out or something. Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah, I do remember saying that on the clearer thinking. And I think about it all the time. I think people get really upset. That's one of the the things that I've noticed that bothers people a lot, bothers them enough to get angry, pretty angry and even fearful and an emotional response over five out of 10, like close to six, seven, eight, even, is if they feel kind of like they got tricked somehow or manipulated. Then they're like, it's uh, so kind of emotionally reactive about it. And then once they're emotionally reactive about it, then it's like there's no logic there anymore.
Yeah, that's so confusing because when I look at, for example, the PDM psychodynamic manual, uh, then like the version 2 is the one that I'd had a look at. Um, for psychopathy, they say that sort of the core drive is a fear of being manipulated. And so, like, maybe I'm mangling the words, but
Huh.
fear of being manipulated. And so being like the one who manipulates first in order to remain the control over the mutual manipulation. And then like in particular, like you, who is like not concerned, or is, like, finds it weird for people to be concerned about that. And so, like, I don't know, something's wrong with this PDM thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't heard of the PDM. That's an interesting theory. I'll give them a lot of credit on that theory. I think that that theory, if you told me and I wasn't a psychopath, I might be like, that makes sense. You'd be like, yeah, sure, that's like a plausible theory. That would kind of make sense, is, they're so worried about being manipulated that they have to be the first one to do it. Like, I can imagine there being people who do that. I just don't know that they're
Mm.
psychopaths. They're probably, we can call them something else. We can call them, you
Paranoid in
know,
some fashion is. Uh,
yeah, subject
yeah,
to
I could also
something.
imagine that there's some sort of. Uh, there's some kind of like projective identification going on where, like, if this works for the commenters, that they sort of become afraid of being manipulated in some fashion, that maybe a therapist who interacts with someone who enjoys like manipulating others also becomes overly concerned about being manipulated and then thinks that that is like a projective identification of like some part in the person doing the manipulating, and then thinks that they can infer from that that the other person is also concerned about being manipulated. But yeah, I don't know. Weird theory.
Yeah, that is interesting. I like your explanation for like why they came up with it too. I do
Uh,
think, and there's something too. I think there's something about psychopaths where even just knowing that they manipulate like really puts people on guard in kind of a weird way. Like I think one of the classic stories is that Robert Hare tells, where he's like, "Yeah, I made friends at the prison with these psychopaths that I was studying, and some of them worked in the car mechanic shop." And I was going on a long trip with my family, so I took my car in for them to like get it all fixed up and whatever. And then as he was driving away from the prison, then the car broke down. It was like the brakes were cut or something, like the brakes failed or something, where he thought this is obviously them. They've obviously done this. And then that story has kind of become like the warning. Like, if you're a therapist or a psychologist and you like trust a psychopath at all, then you're stupid. I think that's what's become of that story. It's like meant to be a story being like, I was stupid and don't make the same mistake. Don't trust the psychopath. Honestly, like, I don't know why you're trusting the prison mechanics, maybe. Like, if they know who you are, like, I don't know. That's like a weird, I don't know. Like he didn't maybe seem like he was just being careful enough or something. About this whole story's a little bit weird, but it's especially weird
mm,
that it now has become the situation
yeah.
where I think probably every time, and I interact with like psychologists, and I kind of get that vibe from them too, is that they're like listening to me, but they don't want to really buy into what I'm saying, because then they look stupid. They look like they've made this mistake that everybody's warned them against.
Mm.
And in fact, a lot of them have told me, like, hey, like I told my psychologist friends that I was going to talk with you, and they were like, be careful. Like, don't believe her.
Yeah, no, I think I'm careful to train myself to not be embarrassed of having been gullible. Like, I think it's
Mm.
like a something that's important to me, that I trust people.
Yeah.
And like, of course, I don't know, if my safety or something is at stake, then I apply different rules. But like, I don't want to be the sort of person who just like inherently, without any kind of risk or cost at stake or anything, is like just afraid of being manipulated in some fashion, because that just seems like it would prevent a lot of really positive interactions.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree, Don. And in fact, one of my little shorts is about like trust people or whatever. And okay, where I live, there are great white sharks. Like people post videos of them all the time, usually from drones. It's easiest to see from a drone
Hmm.
because the way that the light reflects on the water, and they're usually deep enough that you can see their shadow or something, um but they're in the same area that the surfers are in, and sometimes they come even closer. They come within the waves or something. And there's like right by where I lived, there's a stencil that says confirmed shark attacks. And that's true too. Is that there have been shark attacks like within a half kilometer of like
Hmm.
where I go into the water, like multiple ones. There's been two, within a half kilometer or something. But what does that mean? Does that mean like I never go in the ocean? That's still like the numbers are so low that
Hmm.
I would rather take the risk, because the chances of me encountering a shark in a negative way are super low. Like they're so low. The chances of me encountering a
Hmm.
shark at all are probably 10%, but I wouldn't be aware of it unless I had like a mask or something and
Hmm.
I was like looking directly at them or whatever. And I think that can be scary to people. Sometimes people don't like swimming in the ocean because they're like, I don't know what's in the ocean. And they're afraid for stuff like that. But I'm just kind of
Hmm.
like, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying I'm not choosing that, because to me that's a stupid idea. For me,
Hmm.
it would be stupid. Exactly like
Yeah.
you said, Don, because there's so many, you would lose out on so many good kind of options. I've just found, and I've tried both ways. I just found that when I said no to most things, then my life was small, and my
Hmm.
opportunities were small. And then when I say yes to most things, here and there I run into a problem, but I also just have so many other good things to kind of offset the problem. Like it's much better to say yes as a default thing. Now that's not to say that some people don't say yes to, to too many things, kind of like because they've been abused and they're like, I'm just going to say yes to like, the weirdest, sketchiest things or something. Or even
Hmm.
I almost wonder, like Dr. Hare story, when he's saying yes to having them, work on his brakes, I'm like, is there something like something almost masochistic about him doing that? Something kind of being like, I don't know. I just think too, I think probably this with the Robert Harris story, when you kind of make something about dominance in a way or trust, when you kind of like superimpose those values in a situation where it doesn't make sense, I think the psychopath is going to mess with you. Like if you want to be kind of like, I'm making this not even just about me getting my car fixed, but about the fact that we have such a good relationship that I know you would never do this to me. Like the
Hmm.
psychopath is not going to play along to your games, your stupid little games about trust. Like I trust you so much or whatever. So I bet it's
Hmm.
probably more that they picked up on the fact that he wanted to brag, later to his friends. Like I trust them even to work on my cars. And they're like, no, we're not going to be just like something for you to brag about. We're not just like here. We're not like zoo animals, like Jane Goodall, best friends with the chimpanzees or something. We're not here to kind of just make you look good. Like, oh, look how well you trained the monkeys, that are in the prison or
Hmm.
whatever. So I bet that's probably what happened more. And then he just kind of decided, well, if you guys aren't going to play games, or if you're not going to play the game that he wants to play, then he's just going to villainize you instead. Then he's going to be like, these people are like tigers. They're like lions. You could never trust them. They're natural predators. So
Yeah, I know. Just having sort of a more detailed understanding of the condition is probably going to be helpful. Like, I know
Yeah.
I've had like really good experiences with like, oh, this also is something I wanted to ask about. Like, in the autism circles, the term high functioning is not so popular anymore because when someone's high functioning, it usually just means 5 years later they're in burnout.
Oh.
And so, like, the new term is like to be low or high support needs,
Mm.
or to have low or high support needs.
Yeah.
And is there something equivalent in the psychopathy community, or is like low and high functioning still the accepted terminology?
I think it's accepted still, like, but I would say that the burnout thing is probably real because I think what usually like of the five big personality traits, the thing that usually distinguishes high functioning psychopaths from like lower functioning ones,
Hmm.
as those terms are often used, is conscientiousness. Like there's
Yeah.
just a higher level of conscientiousness with the high functioning ones. So they're able to kind of like think more steps ahead, like five steps ahead versus like just thinking one step ahead. And because they're able to think five steps ahead,
Hmm.
they're able to accomplish more, I guess, with their psychopathy as it pertains to, educational, professional, money, whatever, relationships or something. Because they're like playing chess or whatever instead of checkers type thing. But I think that most of these high functioning psychopaths do experience neuroticism. And
Hmm.
that is a negative thing that they experience. I wouldn't necessarily call it burnout. They're probably the thing with psychopaths is I would say they're almost like constantly in a state of burnout.
Hmm.
So I hesitate to kind of say that the
Yeah.
neuroticism is burnout, but it is kind of it's similar. It's like I don't want to have to keep uh thinking seven steps ahead,
Hmm.
like I don't have the time or energy or desire to keep doing that for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, then maybe something like low support needs is perhaps
Yeah.
the better term. So, like, my low support needs friends with like psychopathy, or I don't know, something close to it. Like, I get along with them like really well, and like they're so extremely open. I chat with like lots of people with a bunch of different personality disorders, and like one aspect of, for example, narcissistic personality disorder or like pathological narcissism is this dimension that's called hiding the self. Um, that's at least in the pathological narcissism inventory is called that. And that is something that I encounter quite a lot, that they're like really shy about like opening up about their feelings, that you really need to like make them feel really safe and gain their trust over a long time. And which like if they also have disorganized attachment is really difficult. And then yeah, with like the friends of mine who have like some form of psychopathy, that's like never a problem. They're like super open. We can talk about everything. And I wonder whether that has to do with like me never being in any kind of position of authority over them. And like Robert Hare was probably in some kind of decision of
Mm.
authority over them when it comes to, I don't know, parole decisions and whatnot. And probably that made a huge difference in that case. Or do you think so?
Yeah, that I think that probably made a huge difference. I think there's something about not even just the authority, but that Robert Hare I think was trying to
Mm,
kind of exploit them in a way.
yeah.
Because he wanted to become famous, I think, based on the psychopaths. And at first, I think he wanted to become famous by being like the Jane Goodall, who's like helping them and they trust, oh, they don't trust anyone else, but
Hmm.
they trust me. I think that's what he was probably trying to do. And I think, authority probably had something to do with it, but it's probably the reason why your friends are so open is because you've never tried to use them in a way that they're not consenting. I think that
Hmm.
is what probably triggers like a lot of psychopaths. And that can be often because there's an authority relationship. where somebody thinks they have authority and so they're trying to impose on you. That's almost a better way to put it. The feeling that you're being imposed on or being kind of used, like those, even if you're being used, it feels like somebody's imposing on you.
Mm,
Uh, and I think if you're not yeah, it's a little bit more complicated with the Robert Hare thing. I keep wanting to say it's more like a personhood issue, that as long as you're kind of okay and respect the personhood and autonomy of the psychopath, then they probably don't see you as a threat. Because that's, I think, the main thing that they see as a threat is like attacks to their personhood. Um,
mm,
and that includes like all the generic, physical attacks too, like attacks to their safety, anything that would kind of threaten any
mm.
aspect of their personhood. But with Robert Hare, I think it probably was too, just like teach him a lesson. It wasn't just the personhood. It was like, we're not going to be your trained monkeys.
Mm,
So yeah, probably
yeah.
like 5 out of 10 about the authority, but also just wanting to like
Hmm.
stick it to him, be like, you think you
Yeah.
understand us? You don't. You think that we have a rapport? You have rapport with us? You don't.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I was wondering, like, yeah, you usually say psychopaths, so like identity first language, I suppose, and the alternative would be the person first language, like person with psychopathy.
Uh-huh.
Is there like among people who care about this at all some kind of preference in the
Um,
community?
I have not heard a preference. Sometimes people will jump in there and be like, "Oh, it's people with psychopathy." I think when it comes to psychopaths, like what is their preference? I have never heard them say kind of a person first preference,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because kind of maybe if I had to guess that it's like the weak sense of self or whatever, it's like you can call me whatever you want.
Yeah,
Like people
exactly.
could call me like slut, whore, bitch, whatever, and I'd be like, whatever. Like, so I'm not
Uh,
super sensitive to what anything I'm being called.
yeah. Okay, this ties into my next question, which is then probably also not answerable. Like the term psychopath is so like negatively connoted, and like I know someone who basically has this very small sense of self, but has like absolutely no, like would probably score, I don't know, low five on the PCLR, and like probably very close to zero,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I mean. What's that? I don't know. I'm reading like this. I'm listening to the James Fallon book right now, and I don't know where like he was going out also like a very relatively normal life, and like, is there some term that is like I have been saying like pro-social psychopath or pro-social psychopathy or something for that, but it's like long and complicated, and it contains psychopathy again. Is there like
Yeah.
some sort of term with a neutral connotation?
That's really interesting. I think that a lot of people have mentioned to me that they think that there just needs to be a rebranding. I guess kind of like
Hmm.
borderline personality disorder used to be called something else. I forget what it was.
Well, it's still called emotionally unstable in the ICD, if
Oh,
I remember
is it?
correctly.
Okay, so maybe it's that. And that's kind of a negative, emotionally unstable. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I don't know of any term. The ones that I identify with the most when people are like, "Oh, psychopath this or that," the way that I personally identify is a personality disorder with features of psychopathy. Those are the most dominant features that I have. And then there are other features too. I have
Mm,
obsessive compulsive personality disorder features. Like I have kind of like this idea of the narrator, or the thinking,
mm,
wanting to have like a reason or an explanation, or even forcing like my decision making and thoughts into like conscious thought into like a narration
mm,
instead of just the images or whatever else it used to be before. I think that's associated with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And then I also have like some kind of sensitivities and rigid thinking, those aspects of what so my therapist would say like Asperger's at the time, but like autism
mm,
spectrum disorder. So I have certain physical sensitivities, and a certain rigidity and like tendency to take things literally
Yeah.
that are associated with the autism spectrum. So that's how I describe myself. I think, and this is how it was explained to me that by my therapist, that personality disorders are best thought of, you know, in a way, as being all personality disorders with these ways that they manifest
Mm,
themselves. Yeah. So if there is like a weak sense of self, then it usually manifests itself in kind of these psychopathic ways of thinking, not necessarily the behaviors, because the behaviors come from anything. Like if you were out in space, would you expect a psychopath to act the same way if they were like by themselves? Behaviors are so
mm,
contextual, I guess, is what I'm saying. But the way of thinking, like these psychopathic ways of thinking and conceiving of yourself, is what I associate with like, kind of like this weak sense of self. You have a weak sense of self, and so you tend to kind of think about yourself and others in particular ways. You're not
mm,
necessarily criminal, although you certainly could be. And there are a ton of people. So I don't know. There's not a way of saying it. Maybe what we should dig into, Don, and maybe we can start this our own self, is this idea of like weak sense of self personality disorder. Is that a pretty good
mm-hmm.
title?
Well, it's a it's quite a mouthful as well,
Yeah,
but I mean
uh-huh.
it's on par with prosocial psychopathy, I suppose.
Yeah, that is.
Like there's
We'll keep
alexithymia that
workshopping, keep thinking.
yeah, there's also the term alexithymia that is like a bit
Mm.
hard to spell, but like maybe something short like Alexies or something could work. And yeah, I don't know.
All
I've
right,
been
I'll
like
keep
toying
thinking.
with a few terms.
Yes,
Oh
psychopath.
yeah, let me know when there's one
It's weird
that's
too.
somewhat established.
Yeah, because psychopathology means something totally different than
Yeah.
psychopath. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so weird. Yeah, when it comes to like the sense of self, that's also something that I find confusing because the criteria, the section 2 criteria in the DSM-5 for narcissistic personality disorder are like super superficial. It's just sort of outward behavioral criteria that like lots and lots of people fulfill.
yeah.
And I don't know, like I would sort of select criteria for their like clinical relevance in a way. Like
Mm.
if I give someone this diagnosis, does this help me? Does this help other people? Give these people the right treatment, the sort of treatment that they need? And if people select people with that diagnosis for their clinical trials, then um, are they selecting a group of people that
Hmm.
plausibly can benefit from the same treatment? And like they're the sort of
That's interesting.
psychodynamic view of having like a false self that protects against some terrible feeling of emptiness underneath.
Huh.
That's probably more borderline like, sort of like a defense against borderline. Um, that is yeah, much more plausible to me, but that's maybe a bit mirrored in the section 2 and the alternative or dimensional criteria in the DSM, but like it's not really made explicit. And yeah, so this is something that I find very like awkward to work with. And there are lots of people with psychopathy who um, have who like have a lot of like grandiosity, for example, and so like quite easily fulfill the criteria for NPD as well. But I
Yes,
imagine they fall into a group of people that actually have like pathological narcissism and psychopathy, and they fall into a group of people that only have psychopathy really, but plus a bit of grandiosity or something. And so like how would you like, and in particular, if like the person who actually has both is like not really in touch with themselves, like, and like, yeah, like I would imagine like if someone is like not sufficiently in touch with themselves, and like, what does it even mean if they have a false self, like with like the regular person with pathological narcissism? Um, when there is like some kind of narcissistic injury, then it's like super traumatic for them because like the flaws in their false self are revealed in some fashion. And that is like revealing when it comes to like the existence of the false self in the first place. But like when the self itself is so far removed or so small that the person is like not in touch with any kind of injuries, if there are any, then like where do you even draw the line? How do you distinguish these two groups at all? Like, do you have any guidelines? Any
yeah.
ideas?
So I have maybe a couple ideas. First of all, get what you're saying, I think, about like the overlap. And there are, for instance, like if you've listened to any of the interviews with Dorian, um
Oh,
he has
not
all the
yet. They're on my
tattoos on
list.
his face.
Yeah, I
He,
know.
okay. Yeah, so he I can
Mm.
tell is more
Yeah, I
narcissistic
know.
than I am, right? And also my girlfriend is more narcissistic
Mm.
than I am, and she will have like narcissistic injuries in ways that surprise me. I'll be like, I thought we were both psychopaths.
Mm.
So that was like actually an
Hmm.
issue, early on in our relationship is that she kind of wanted, not really wanted, but she had like a little bit of an expectation that she had to kind of like acknowledge and work around, I think, of being like worshipped, of being kind of like the one and only, of being like whatever. And so I think to me, like, yeah, I could totally see what you're saying about there being overlap. And I really like what you said about this idea of maybe thinking about when you're including these criteria, having the primary, I think this is what you said, correct me if I'm wrong, having the primary thought be like, would this be helpful? Like if somebody had this um, characteristic, would this particular therapy that we use for narcissists, let's say, help them or hurt them? Would it be
Yeah,
helpful or,
exactly.
yeah, helpful or hurtful? And I think that's like a really good way of thinking about it. Like it really kind of, instead of saying we have these labels, these stagnant labels, and kind of mostly thinking about it in terms of like, oh, because we need to study people. Like we're psychology professors. We have to study
Mm.
people. And so let's choose what's easiest for us in order to sort these people out to be able to study them. Instead, if you had like a criteria that was mostly kind of like, well, these people with these types of characteristics are more susceptible to this type of therapy. I think a really good example of this is borderline personality disorder, where they have DBT, dialectics
Mm.
behavioral therapy, or
Behavioral
what.
therapy.
Yeah, where we should just probably define borderline as basically anybody who could benefit from DBT, and that would make kind of more sense in a way than the way that we kind of currently do it. And because of the overlap, etc. Like the people, kind of like I was saying, if people could get better by just strengthening their sense of self, then let's call those people psychopaths or something, instead of kind of being like the psychopaths are people who are criminal and, like have multiple sexual
Yeah.
relationships and whatever the thing is. I would say too, though, one thing that I like about that kind of focus is it reminds me of I just recently saw this video about bass playing, like upright bass playing, where somebody was like, we have to stop saying that there's only one way to play the bass, because the truth is the bass is such a big instrument that people's natural physiology is going to interact with it in different ways, much more
Hmm.
different than like necessarily like the violin or something, is kind of what they're suggesting. Because what works for somebody, like, should I keep this perfect hand position, or is it okay to kind of collapse my fingers? Like, if it doesn't make a difference in the sound, why are we being sticklers about the technique, kind of thing? Like, we
Hmm.
should approach it in terms of, is it helpful or is it hurtful? Does it help my sound to play with this technique? If it doesn't help, then don't do it.
Hmm.
If it hurts, even if it helps a little bit, but it hurts a lot, then don't do it. Like this kind of attitude. And I think that is something that maybe psychology is missing a little bit when they do these diagnostic criterion. Is it helpful or is it hurtful? Does it help people to understand and also to kind of have like some flexibility with it? In the same way that like certain characteristics describe certain psychopaths but maybe not me, or certain characteristics describe me but
Hmm.
not my girlfriend, or me but not Dorian, or whatever else it is. Like this idea of like what we're really trying to do is just have something that is helpful to help us understand reality, you know and to the extent that nothing, do you know this phrase, the map is not the territory?
Yeah.
Yeah, where we can't prioritize the map over the territory. We always have to understand that there's a disconnect between like the diagnostic criterion and what's happening boots on the ground,
Hmm.
because there's no way that we can take something as complex as humanity And even like a
Mm,
disorder as complex as a personality disorder and distill it into like 20 separate little, you know, characteristics or something.
mm,
So I think sometimes we lose that awareness, you know, the map is not the territory, and we start to think and I get why. I think this is why it happens, is because psychology as a field is suffering like a crisis of legitimacy. And I think
mhm,
especially researchers who are studying psychopathy experience this, because it's like, what is it? Is it antisocial personality disorder? Is it psychopathy? Is it, you know, tested via this? Is it factor one? Is it factor two? Is there a factor three? You know, is it highly reactive hot-headedness? Is it very low reactive cold-heartedness? You know, there's actually like a lot of stuff that's
mm,
not resolved. So they have a very difficult time doing any research that's legitimate, because it's not even certain who is a psychopath or not.
mm,
And so I get why they want to focus on stuff like that, because like they feel like as soon as they get that resolved, then they can finally understand what a psychopath is.
mm,
But I like your thought about like having it be more associated with treatment. You know, if this treatment helps, it's kind of like, you know, how do we know if you have a bacterial infection? Penicillin works, you know? Like if
mm.
you define it in terms of like the whether the treatment works or not, then there's
Yeah,
it seems more
I think this.
helpful.
I think to some extent this is happening already. Like something that I don't know, not really observed, but that I think I might have read between the lines is that like when a diagnostician thinks that a particular patient with like the particular problems that this patient has would benefit, for example, from mentalization-based treatment, then they know, okay, mentalization-based treatment is not covered by the insurance yet
Uh,
for pathological narcissism, but it is covered for borderline. So because everything's a mess anyway, let's give this person the borderline diagnosis so that they can get the NPD treatment for pathological narcissism. Like it is a slightly different formulation. Like there's a separate handbook for MBT for pathological narcissism, so it's a bit different. But like, I suppose you can only get it at the moment if you have the borderline diagnosis. Well, it probably depends on the health insurance, but
yes.
yeah. So like, I think this sort of understanding and I don't know, common sense of the diagnostician probably plays a role in bridging this gap between the lacking research and the individual pathologies.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Excellent point in general, that you have like the third kind of like player, you know, like the person with the diagnosis, the psychologist, and the insurance company.
Yeah. Yeah, this is also something I was wondering about. Like you mentioned a few different like types of psychopathy. Do you know whether you have like this type with the like underactive amygdala or the type with the hyperactive amygdala, or do you make like a completely different distinction? And I don't know.
I don't know about the amygdala. What does the amygdala do again?
Mm, I don't know exactly what it does, but what they observed is that, and this is like taken from a talk by someone who mostly works with children, is that like children who show like callous and unemotional traits fall into two very different categories, and these fall again into subcategories. But like let's stick to just those two. They fall into the category of children that are sort of born with an underactive amygdala, and they fall into a category of children that have been like exposed to a ton of trauma, and due to that have like a hyperactive amygdala and usually some comorbidities, like ADHD usually. And I suppose like I also associate paranoia with that, but I don't know how like universal that is. And then like this is sort of where the knowledge of this person that like there were like these other sub distinctions that he still made and everything's was like a much more complex picture that he painted. But like he works with children. He mentioned that then during adolescence into adulthood, early adulthood, these children with the hyperactive amygdala, like some of the children with hyperactive amygdala, develop some form of like dissociation. Is probably like my term for that, where they like for example, channel all of these overwhelming emotions that they have all the time of like fear and everything all into anger. And so
Mm.
they have like a very sudden, very like reflexive aggression response. And that gets like lands them in prison very often. And then what I observe is that a lot of friends of mine who have like these like psychopathy traits also have ADHD. One person seemed like a bit paranoid to me, and like lots of things that I would associate with hyperactive amygdala.
Huh.
And so I'm unsure whether I know anyone of these people with the underactive amygdala, but most likely reality is more complex than that. And
Yeah.
most likely there is some sort of genetic component, and then I don't know what happens to the amygdala. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then as you kind of say this, like I have noticed paranoia, like so uh again Dorian, I think even in his title it says like
Hmm.
paranoid
Exactly.
psychopath or something. Yeah, he has
Hmm.
paranoia, and I would say my girlfriend, and maybe it's kind of associated with the narcissism because they have that in common too. She's probably like 3 out of 10 has like a little bit of paranoia that comes like kind of comes and goes a little
Hmm.
bit. I probably have like some paranoia, but I think it kind of manifests more like, is it okay to say something about you based on what you said earlier?
Yeah, sure.
Kind of
Hmm.
like in like the ways that you've kind of described about like it's not even, at least for me, it's not even what I would describe as a fear, but just an awareness, of like, what others could possibly be asking me. Like you said, somebody could jump out of the bushes and be like, why are
Yeah,
you
exactly.
swinging your arms when you're walking? That's more the way my paranoia manifests itself, is just kind of like
Mm.
an idea that there could be not threats necessarily, but kind of like things I'd have to deal with.
Mm.
Things I'd have to deal with that can kind of pop up that populate my internal
Yeah.
monologue. Yeah, kind of like this constant like awareness. I guess this is kind of true too. Like people say, like let's say you are in a very high advanced kind of military role or something. Like you're one of these like Navy SEALs or
Hmm.
something, where they talk about situational awareness. Like they're in a
Yeah.
restaurant and they always have to have their back to the wall and like facing the door or something. And that's the way that my paranoia manifests itself, is more kind of that, where it's like more a
Mm.
constant kind of awareness and like assessment of threats in a way that doesn't really make sense given my life.
Mm.
Like it
Yeah,
is
I had the
excessive.
same.
Yeah, it's
I
it's too
was.
much. It doesn't make sense. But it's not as kind of ego oriented as, for instance, my girlfriend or like Dorian, where it seems like you're also kind of worried that somebody might have it out for you. And I don't really
Mm.
think anybody has it out for me. I don't really have that thought or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's very similar for me. I think not so much anymore. At this point, I don't really think about my seating position, but I also have ADHD, and I've yeah, definitely had this experience in like restaurants where I, for some reason, wanted to sit with the back to the wall and didn't know why, but yeah, I felt more comfortable there.
I even have. So sometimes when I notice these things about myself, especially I try to listen to intuition about things like this because I don't want to keep living in a disordered way. So whenever I'm like doing
Hmm.
something disordered, I be like, please, intuition, just show me how I'm being stupid. And one of the things that
Yeah.
intuition told me to do was put in my reminders every Sunday night. And all it says is threat inventory. And all I kind of mean by it is that I just go through and kind of like consciously go through the threats and be like, there's no threats. That's what I do. So every Sunday I
Mm.
like, and it takes like a second or two to just be like, okay, you want to
Mm.
find threats so badly? Let's just do it right now. And look, there are no threats. Okay, good. Now we can drop this. You don't have to like, lurk in the background thinking that there's
Mm.
going to be a threat.
I wish I had done this when I still had this problem in my adolescence. Like a friend of mine also just like she had this like extreme fear that she would die if she failed an exam,
Mm.
and then uh, like made a list, wrote down all the like potential things that could possibly happen when she fails an exam, and then wrote down why, like, even in that case, she's not going to die, or it's very unlikely that she'll die, and like really worked through that point by point. And I think if I had thought of that
Hmm.
in my adolescence, it would probably also be really helpful because at this point, I cannot imagine what concrete thing I might have been so afraid of.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Uh,
That's really interesting. It is kind of true too. Like there are so many. I think like it was an illusion when I was a child where I was like, and then I'll put all my thoughts conscious. I'll just be conscious of all my thoughts because the truth is it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of my thoughts are my conscious thoughts. And then the rest of the iceberg is underneath. And there's all these kind of things happening. And so sometimes, like, that's why I like meditation too. Often it's just like, just check in with yourself. Like, is there anything that you're feeling, anything that you're thinking, any stress that
mm,
you're feeling? And for me, for whatever reason, and I do think it's largely like an attention deficit or like a weird way of attention, like focusing on myself or like if I'm not focused on myself, then it's like I almost ignore things. Like I ignore the fact I'm thirsty. I ignore the fact that I'm
mm,
hungry until I get angry, and then I'm like, oh, I need to eat or whatever. Like that's kind of more my tendency. So it is nice to stop and
mm.
pause and then be like, let's just look. Do I have paranoid thoughts? Do I have sad thoughts? Do I have angry thoughts? What's kind of going on right now? That's really helped in general.
Yeah, yeah. I also forget to eat and drink if I don't
Yeah.
check in from time to time. Yeah, like one thing that I was also curious about, and I don't know, you probably don't have that, but maybe you know some people who you've talked to, is sadism, and
Mm,
like it seems to somewhat coincide with psychopathy, but not necessarily. And this is like really confusing to me. Like I imagine it's like a really good adaptation. If there's the environment is super violent, then either you can sort of tune that out and not be affected by it, or you can even enjoy it and then also not be like negatively affected by it. So like as an adaptation, it kind of makes sense, but it seems redundant in a way. So I don't quite understand it. And like in one thing that came to mind is I have sort of a nurturing feeling toward my inner child. And so if I see other people who struggle with similar things that I've struggled with, I feel like I generally feel sort of an interest in helping people in general. But I think in that case, in particular, I feel like a particular strong pull to help this person because I like see some part of myself in them. I feel like and I can empathize particularly well with them. And so I imagine if someone like hates their inner child, for example, then if they see something of themselves, of like that inner child in another person, then they might want to like actively destroy that person or that part of that person. And yeah, and this was like sort of, I don't know, at least I haven't found any evidence for it. Like one person that I talked to, um, has like first developed sadism at like super young age, and then only years and years later, I don't know, in the around puberty probably, developed the psychopathy. So
mm,
like that doesn't make any sense. And they would imagine that maybe, yeah, perhaps there's something that like some environments suggest the defense mechanism of sadism more than other environments, and then maybe some environments suggest psychopathy more as a defense mechanism, and then maybe like the self-consciousness that comes with puberty maybe also plays a role
mm.
in mediating that process. And yeah, I don't know. I'm very confused about it. Just trying to understand it better.
Yeah, that it is really interesting. And honestly, it's like one of these areas that I have not given enough thought to, especially
Hmm.
since it is associated with psychopathy. And also, intuition has told me that my paternal grandfather, my father's father,
Hmm.
was a sadist, and he's
Hmm.
interestingly a chiropractor. Do you know what chiropractor
Hmm.
is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I almost wonder if he chose that that job. Have you ever seen the
Hmm.
musical Little Shop of Horrors? If you like
No, I've
theater.
not. No.
Yeah, so there's a character who becomes a dentist because he's a sadist. And so
Yes,
there's a song where
obviously.
it's like, oh, you like hurting things? So be a dentist. Because dentists are always hurting people. And I really feel like that probably is kind of how it was for my grandfather, who became a chiropractor. You're like, to people's backs or whatever. Not like every chiropractor is a sadist, obviously, is what I'm saying.
Mm,
But he probably was like, this is a nice thing, you know? And I think that my
yeah.
dad shows a few signs of sadism, probably like 3 out of 10,
Mm,
like kind of enjoys hurting others like a little bit. And I
yeah.
wonder if it's like something he just kind of learned from his dad. And I also heard the statistic recently. It's like a Kurt Vonnegut quote. He's like an author, and he said this actually. He was talking to a Holocaust survivor, and she said something that she learned from the Holocaust is that 10% of people will be kind of naturally mean, like a sadist. And she says 10% of people will be really merciful and naturally nice, kind of like you were saying, you're nice to your inner child. And so you naturally feel nice to other people's inner child. And then she says the rest, the 80% in the middle, could go either way. They can be persuaded either way.
Mm,
So I do think there's something kind of like independent a little bit from sadism and psychopathy. I think that obviously you can be sadistic and not be a psychopath. And I think that can sometimes be hard for people to understand. Like, why do people choose sadism? Like, why do you end up with an aesthetic? And I don't know if it's kind of like this, where it's like, do you choose your favorite color? Did I choose somewhere along the line that yellow is my favorite color instead of purple?
mm,
Or is it like what happened? I don't know if that's how sadism kind of develops, or if it's, as you say, kind of suggested that it's somehow a defense mechanism. And maybe it's kind of like
mm,
what the you said those researchers said about psychopathy is that maybe sadism is like I don't want to be hurt, so I'm going to hurt people first. Like the
mm.
psychopaths are so afraid of being manipulated that they want to manipulate instead of
Uh,
being manipulated.
yeah,
Maybe it's like that. I need to
that
think
could make
about
sense.
it more. We should get anybody who's a sadist who is listening to this. I would like to talk with you, and maybe Dawn will join me if she's available during the time period or whatever. Because I am honestly like curious now about sadism, and I feel like I have not looked at it like close enough to even have like a good understanding of it.
Yeah, once you upload the video, I can send it to someone.
Nice.
Yes,
Okay,
probably
perfect.
with the
Someone you might,
timestamp and
yeah,
everything.
it could be somebody that you might know. There you go.
Yeah, let's see. Um, yeah, so this was something that I've like found very puzzling, and like actually, I found it also puzzling in the other direction. Like, if someone doesn't experience emotions very strongly, then why would they enjoy sadism? Like, in that direction is also
Yeah,
uh, surprising. But yeah, I suppose it works somehow.
yeah,
Like, I mean, people do experience it.
yeah. They experience it, and there's a phrase in English: "To hear it from the horse's mouth" is like the best way to learn about it. So we'll get the sadist in, and
Yeah.
yeah, then we can ask them.
Mm, that would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so that was that section. I'm looking through my questions, what is like left and where I want to like jump to next. There is this interesting question of like the link between psychopathy and enlightenment. Um, there's something that I noticed. There is a person who's researched persistent non-symbolic consciousness, I think is the like professional term for it. It's basically enlightenment.
Mm,
And I just wanted to find like a fancy scientific sounding term for it, I suppose. And this person seems a bit weird, has also I don't know. Like there is a Slate Star Codex article about it, and like I don't quite trust this researcher or like this researcher's like rationality, let's say, but like the findings are mostly based on interviews. And so I would imagine that like unless he's done some fancy like selection bias type of thing, I would imagine that we still can take things away from these interviews. And in these interviews, all of these enlightened people describe basically a state that feels very positive for them, and that uh, maybe that's even associated with grandiosity in some fashion. So like it feels very positive for them, but like they're not really in touch with their bodies. So they can be extremely stressed, and they can actually like look very stressed to their loved ones. They can look super unhealthy and everything, but they don't report being stressed. They don't feel stressed, and it's as if like they're just not in touch with most of their feelings anymore. They're not in touch with their bodies. They're just in like this pleasant state the whole time. And so I'm wondering, like, is it somehow that people with psychopathy have figured, oh, claiming to be enlightened is a good way of I don't know, wielding power over people, or is it the other way around that we, through enlightenment, or mix of both, of course, that through enlightenment training, you basically attain a state similar to this, what I call like acquired psychopathy. So the one where you do this like through some kind of dissociation, maybe. So not the one where you're just born with an underactive amygdala. Um, so like both of these seem somewhat plausible to me, but like it's very striking that how similar these descriptions are.
Yeah, I tend to think
What are your
it's
thoughts?
yeah, I tend to think it's the second one. And this is like Buddhist enlightenment kind of thing, right? Like the what Buddhism, how they use the
Yeah,
word
probably.
enlightenment. Yeah.
Mm.
So this is why I think, in Buddhism, my understanding, my limited understanding is that part of the training is to realize that the connection, the attachment to self is like the source of a lot of suffering.
Mm.
And so I do think that there's like a push to detach from the self, uh, in various ways or whatever. And so that's the thing that I have thought, okay, this is something that's very similar to psychopaths,
Mm.
is that they're trying to detach from self and see that the self is an illusion. And psychopaths already are detached from the self. And so that's my guess is what's the connection there between enlightenment and psychopathy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's also interesting that Daniel Ingram in like Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha is like a book where he like walks the reader step by step through all the like different phases of the process toward enlightenment, and with like all the risks and like how do they recognize the particular step, and like lots of contextual information. It's all like fairly like well structured and scientific almost. And There he puts like a very strong emphasis on like ethics training in the process. And so I could imagine that it's not so much that that's necessary to attain enlightenment, but that rather once you attain enlightenment, it's like very hard to like be motivated to get that back. And so that he like puts a strong emphasis on like putting it in from the start. So
Yeah.
maybe he was also attuned to like these there are even like some sex scandals and whatnot among enlightened people. And yeah, so it's really striking how many parallels there are.
Yeah, I could totally see the sex scandal thing.
Yeah. But yeah, like maybe we can get like someone enlightened on at some point
Yes,
and
anybody
compare
who's
with them. I
enlightened,
don't
we'd
know
love to
anyone.
talk with you.
Daniel Ingram himself.
Yeah, contact him, see if he's willing to do it.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I'm not in touch with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's quite a lot of them. I don't know. Do you want to do your oil change, or do you have time for another um,
Oh,
different topical area?
yeah, we have to. I probably have another 10 minutes. Probably. Do you have another question?
Oh God, yeah, for 10 minutes. Like something that I would find very interesting is like whether you have noticed anything unusual about like my facial expressions, or about like your ability to read me, or anything of the sort. Something that I like to ask people about.
Yeah. So, one thing I have noticed with your facial expressions is that you have almost and it's okay to share these things with you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, almost like a blankness where it's almost like I'm like, has she gone somewhere else?
Yeah,
And and then like a reaction almost, like the meme where like the lady's going like this or whatever, like she's reacting to different things. She's like almost like that. So you'll have a blankness and then like a reaction shot almost like it would show up in a TV show of
yeah.
and then
Hmm.
back to kind of like engaged again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, in between, I did sometimes read my notes, but like, was it like a really permanent thing, or was it just like in
I will
some
try to
phases in
go
between?
back, remind me. I'll try to go back
Hmm.
to the video and find
Oh
places where I'll be
yeah,
like,
that'd
oh,
be
here's
interesting.
this and that.
Mhm. Because one thing that is that I remember doing is like in high school at some point I learned about facial expressions,
Oh,
and then I started to like practice using those for my communication, just sort of like a foreign language that I gradually learned.
mm,
And now it like one person said that I seem to be using my facial like seem to be expressing relatively like I have all sorts of like feelings all the time, intuitions and reactions and everything. But like sometimes they're just like they don't fit into the flow of the conversation. They would be
mm,
distracting in some fashion. They would like basically distract from go off topic in some fashion. And
hmm.
so I don't communicate those on my face, just as I wouldn't like go off topic with my spoken language either. And it seems very natural to me to not do that, but for other people, it seems to be very immediate that they just cannot control what they express on their faces. And that, yes, it's an interesting contrast that I'm
Yeah,
investigating.
it's interesting. Even as you were kind of saying this, like when you said something that you don't find something communicate, like there's, I will kind of, I'll try to imitate it. So it's like you're talking, 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 engaged, and then it's almost like this face, and then back.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. It's probably it might be related to monotropism that I tend to focus on one thing at a time, and
Mm.
so uh, I like to focus just on the thing that I'm saying, and then when I realize that like right now a facial expression would be like congruent with the thing that I'm saying, then I'm probably diverting a bit of my attention to that, but then I go back to the actual content, and
Yeah.
you can imagine it's something along those lines.
You know what I would also kind of guess that it is that it just takes, like you talk, you're a little bit of a fast talker,
Hmm.
and I would guess this is just like a total speculation that, or, something to like kind of look into, that maybe one of the reasons why is your mind is going faster than your speech. And so while you're still talking, your mind sometimes goes somewhere else. And they're both related because the faster the speech is, the better it is because then the closer your mind speed is with your speech speed. But also like there's only so fast you can talk, and so there's still going to be moments where the mind, you're still talking and the mind has just for like a split second gone somewhere else. I would guess that that
Uh-huh.
might be something that's happening.
And you imagine that, like, in that case, my facial expressions would mirror what I'm thinking about at this moment and
Yeah,
not what I'm
instead of what you're
saying at this
saying.
moment. Okay, so you notice like some sort of delay between uh, where like my facial expressions are then probably first, and then I'm talking about the topic that is congruent with the facial expressions, or is it the other way around?
It would be like for like a second and a half, maybe, is usually how long it lasts, or like a second. Your face
Mm-hmm.
does not reflect like that it's engaged in the present moment. It's like somewhere else. And then you
Mm-hmm.
come back because it's probably like you're finishing the sentence or you have to kind of check back
Uh,
in. It would be kind of like, do you ever watch TV and scroll your phone at the same time?
Probably done that, yeah.
Yeah. So my girlfriend likes to do it. I hate it. I'm like,
Yeah.
but sometimes she's laughing at something and I can tell that it's not about the TV because it doesn't,
Yeah.
there's a lack of
Mm.
congruence there. Like the face is not reflective of what's going on with your mouth in terms of saying things.
Hmm.
And so that's when I know she's scrolling on her phone instead of watching the TV show with
Yeah,
me. So
perhaps.
that's the thing that clues me into it. And that's why I suspect that it's your mind is somewhere else because it's like there's a lack of congruence to your facial expressions and what you're saying sometimes. Not
Yeah,
right now, for
perhaps I'm
instance. You're totally into it.
okay.
Well, it's
Yeah,
probably
perhaps
because,
I'm. Hmm?
and here's another thing. Sometimes I think, especially probably in stuff like, can I say something about you? Okay,
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
some of the things that you say are less, are more unscripted. Let's say you can kind of tell that
Hmm.
like you've either said,
Yeah.
like given the definition of this or whatever so many times that, and I do this too, like how many times have I talked
Mm,
about, weak sense of self? Like a
that door.
thousand.
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
That I just have certain ways of saying things now, and I can kind of like check out because it's almost like the part of the brain that needs to say those
Exactly.
things. Yeah. And so then, but when you're saying something that's new or you're hearing something that's new, then your face reflects like more of a 100% here, like presentness.
Ah, okay. Interesting. I would have thought that it's the other way around. Like, hmm. No, I need to think about that. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like I can concentrate on my face more when I don't have to put that much effort into like phrasing things and like thinking through the concepts first and then phrasing things. Like I imagine like there's first the thinking, and then it overlaps a bit with the talking. And then it's like, oh, okay, there's first the thinking, then there's the phrasing,
Yeah.
and the talking is even slower. And so at some point, the phrasing is done, and the talking still takes a while. And during that time, I have like a bit of spare mental capacity to like attend to my facial expressions. And so this is how I imagine
Hmm.
I might have slotted that in. But
Yeah.
this would like suggest the opposite hypothesis that especially in those moments um, when I am like mentally engaged, I express more.
Yeah. You know what I would think? I think you have accurately described because it's funny, like from the, let's say, like blank, more blank face, like the far away face, there usually is a very strong facial expression that follows it. So I bet what happens is your mind goes somewhere else. You're like, oh, Don, you're not like giving any facial expressions. And so then you're like, okay, now I give a facial expression. But the reason why you think I haven't given a facial expression is because your mind has gone somewhere else.
Mm,
Like there's probably an awareness that your face has gone blank and you're like, oh shit,
yeah.
gotta like gotta give that facial expression. So I think that it's not necessarily inconsistent the way that you experience it with the way that I have guessed maybe the kind of
hmm
mechanism. But all happening very fast, like split, your mind goes somewhere else for like half of a second. You realize, oh, whoops, I haven't been giving any facial expressions. Then you give the
mm
facial expression.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine for other people it's just automatic. They don't have to think about it.
Well, I think for you, it's interesting because probably what my guess again is that, the speech takes so long, your mind wants to go somewhere else, because of ADHD or because of whatever else. Like you're like clearly very um engaged in like thoughts, like the life of the mind,
Mm.
like your mind loves to go all sorts of places. It sounds like, loves to study all sorts of different types of things, think about a bunch of different things. And even sometimes probably feels compelled to, it sounds like from your childhood, feels compelled to come up with the reasons, feels compelled to have,
hmm
consistency or whatever. So, whatever your mind is wanting to do, this probably has naturally happened. And somebody's made a comment to you like, oh, hey, Don, sometimes your facial expression is not congruent with what you're saying. And then you're like, oh, shit, I have to
hmm
like start pretending, with like manufactured facial expressions when really you kind of don't. Like, I don't find it off-putting. It's just distinctive.
Yeah, I could also just be completely blank-faced.
Yeah. I mean, once
Yeah,
people
cool. It's
once
interesting.
you understand the reason why or something, then it is kind of funny. I do get annoyed when my girlfriend is like laughing at the phone instead of the show. I'm like, no, be in this moment with me. So I could see why people could be annoyed and think that you're not in the moment with them. And the truth is you're not for like a second because it's just boring to you to listen to yourself talk, probably. And why do you
Yeah.
have to stay engaged when the mind can just like do the talking and you can go somewhere else for a second?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'd be interested in like a review of the recording
Yeah, totally.
along those lines. Yeah, but
Yeah.
you have to run, get your oil change.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, it was a super pleasure talking with you.
Yeah,
You have like
likewise.
so many interesting thoughts. I was like, oh, I had no idea we're going to talk about dissociative identity disorder. Then it turned out we only talked about that for like 20 minutes or something. We talked about a million other things. So, okay. Like
There's
you're
even more on my list.
Yeah, there's even more on your list. So let's get you back sometime when it feels good
Yeah.
to, and we'll give everybody a chance to like give their thoughts about sadism, enlightenment. And is it okay? Is it okay to invite them to like give you timestamps of where they think your face looks blank, or like anything else that they
Yes.
want about your facial expressions? Okay. So feel free to
Yeah, sure.
comment about Don's facial expressions. Feel free to comment about what was the thing that I was interested in? Something that I hadn't like explored.
Uh-huh.
Man, there was something that you asked me about. I'll give kind of like a
Mhm.
blanket permission. Like anything that I mentioned, feel free to be like, "Oh, Jamie, I think the real reason, kind of like I just did with Don, I think the real reason you're doing this, I just feel like open about this right now. I think it's like a fine and it's good for me to like I said before, not keep living in a disordered way." So this is a free for all. Anybody's invited to comment about me as well, about anything you've noticed in this or any other type of thing or whatever. This has been really interesting and good, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I appreciate you're so well read about so many different things. I'm like, does she sleep? Is this like all she does with her
Special
time?
interest.
Yeah, special interest. Exactly. Yeah. Uh, I'm spending all my time sleeping. It sounds like compared to you, where you're doing all your time reading. So
I also
it's
sleep a lot.
okay. Good. All right. So we'll get you on as soon as we'll get some feedback from everything, and then get you back on.
Mm,
This will be fun.
no.
Sound good?
Yeah, great.
All
Good
right.
luck with the car
Yeah.
and with the
Thank you so
key.
much. Chat you later.